going? It's Liam here from liamsheriff.com, and I'm bringing you this second part video tutorial of the hormone dominance factor. And today's video is going to be all about insulin and how it stores fat on your love handles, but also I'm going to tell you exactly what causes insulin to be elevated and basically what causes the issue of storing fat in that particular area, and give you a solution to the problem if that is you sort of number one issue at the moment. Just for anybody who missed the introduction to hormone dominance factor last week, without dropping me flicker, I'll include a link in this blog post below this video most likely, so that you can go back to last week and have a look and basically have a watch and kind of understand where this series of hormone dominance factor videos, tutorials actually came from. But today, like I say, we're going to do insulin. Last week was predominantly about introducing the concept of the hormone dominance factor and cortisol, so be sure to check that out before you busy watch this one. Okay, so just as a quick recap though from last week, this was the picture that I displayed, and what we've got here is basically the identification of which hormone stores fat where on your body. Now, estrogen is responsible for storing fat predominantly around the breast tissue or the breast area of women, but also the sort of pec or more commonly the moob area of men, but also around the thighs, the butt and the back of the legs there. So if that is your problem, then we're going to cover that in about 2 weeks time. So watch out for that video. But that's where, if you're insulin high or insulin dominant, that's where you're going to store fat the most. Sorry, estrogen high or estrogen dominant rather, that's where you're going to store fat the most. Again, we spoke about cortisol last week, but just as a recap, cortisol is all about storing fat on the stomach and the abdominal area. So if you're really struggling to spot reduce stomach fat or abdominal fat, then it's most likely that you're cortisol high and you're doing things that will stimulate cortisol and elevate too often, and basically mean that you store fat in that particular area. If we move up to the tricep area, or again more commonly known as the bingo wing for most people today, this has a link to estrogen, but it's more prominent that your growth hormone and testosterone levels are too low, hence not having visible triceps or like I say, having bingo wings. That's going to be next week's topic of conversation, but today's topic is insulin. As we can see, it's all about the love handles and the back fat. So I'm going to basically tell you why that stores fat there and what to do about it. Okay, so the simple insulin problem. Now, if you missed last week, I explained that as a coach I'm very simplistic in my approach and I don't like to overcomplicate things. Now, I mean, I could make these extremely complicated and complex for you to understand, but I'm conscious that I want to give you information that you can just basically apply to your diet or your training program pretty much immediately. So this is going to be very simple for you to follow, and this will work particularly well to a very high percent and a very full effect. So just because the information is simple and very straightforward doesn't mean that its effectiveness is any less than me putting a load of sort of complex jargon on the page there. But the first thing that you need to understand basically about insulin is the top and bottom is that it stores fat on the love handles and the back fat area. So if you're insulin sensitive like me, this is my biggest problem. I can literally gain fat in that area very easy. If you currently are struggling to shift back fat and love handles, then it's more than likely that you're very insulin sensitive as well, and your insulin levels are probably constantly on a roller coaster because of your existing diet. The things that actually elevate insulin and lead it to store fat on your love handles include things like white carbohydrates, which is pretty much every carb, sort of breads, pastas, things that are made of flours, pastries, cakes, etc, etc. Sugar, of course, obviously elevates your blood sugar massively and also insulin levels, and pretty much all processed foods that's been manufactured or chemically refined or processed in some way will cause insulin basically to spike and elevate too high, leading to an excess storage of fat in the love handle area. Okay, we'll go with number 4 instead of number 3, but if you've got constantly high blood sugars and constantly high levels of insulin, or a roller coaster like insulin levels I'm going to discuss in a second, then this can actually lead to high cortisol as well, because this is a kind of a stress to your body, this lack of sort of homeostasis or this lack of balance. So obviously constantly going to high blood sugar, high insulin levels, low insulin levels can actually lead to cortisol being a bit sort of been stimulated and been elevated due to the apparent stress that this will place on your body. So something to be aware of, that not only can you affect insulin, store fat and the love handles, this can have a knock-on effect to cortisol and store fat in the stomach as well. Not to mention insulin, if you become extremely sensitive to insulin and you basically spiking it too often with a very poor diet, you can develop type 2 diabetes, which we're not going to discuss too much today. And number 3, and the kind of last point on the problem with insulin then, is if you're carb loading, which basically means having a lot of carbs on non-training days, then you're at a greater risk of storing fat. So again, we're going to discuss how to eradicate this problem and how to make insulin stable and bring it under control in a moment, but that's what we need to know about the sort of basic problem of insulin for now. All of these issues and problems associated with insulin actually lead to a roller coaster like effect in this particular hormone, and this is where the problem actually comes from, or this is where the extra fat storage actually comes from. Now I hope you can see my my mouse on screen there, but what we've got is these spikes here are in response to a high glycemic meal, which basically just means something with a high GI value, which will spike your blood sugars high upon it entering your body. These things basically include the stuff that we've just mentioned, so the white carbs, the sugars, the processed foods. So every time you eat something like that, your blood sugar levels will skyrocket because you're basically putting more sugar into the body than it needs. Insulin's role is actually to come and lower blood sugar, and that's the reason we'll have it. So every time you spike your blood sugar extremely high, like you would by having something sugary or processed, for example, insulin will also follow this kind of rhythm again. The problem that you have with that is let's say you've had sugar 3 or 4 times in that day. You don't need that much sugar. You only need around about sort of 6 to 10 grams of sugar within your body at any one point. So that will be 6 to 10 grams of glucose in the blood at any one point to do whatever you're doing that day, aside from if you're training, obviously. So all of this excess sugar that you're pumping into your body up here will just be stored as fat. And it'll be stored as fat because insulin will also spike extremely high. It'll come and collect this sugar from the blood, take it off to the tissues, to the cells and the muscles and things like that where it's needed, but then realise that it's not needed and the excess will be stored in your fat cells. So if you're on this kind of constant roller coaster all of the time, which you would be if you're eating these white carbs quite often, then insulin and blood sugars are going to be high, and this period at the top here, the sort of top of the mountain if you like, is always going to be a predominantly fat storing mode. Okay, so the downside again, or the second downside of that, is after this sudden spike, it's always followed by a lull. Now, if this line, which I hope you can see there, is your fasting blood sugar, so the blood sugar level when you're not eating anything, if this was kind of like your base level of blood sugar, then dropping below your normal level would lead to cravings. So what would happen is you would eat something sweet, processed, sugary, carby, whatever, and blood sugars and insulin levels will go really high. It'll store the excess that it doesn't need to use, and then quickly you'll have a sugar crash, and then it'll go below what it's meant to be at normal resting blood sugar. The problem with that is obviously if this area down here is craving, it's unlikely that you're going to go for something like carrot and hummus to boost that blood sugar back up. Okay, your body's going to want you to crave the most sugary thing it can in order to get the blood sugars back up to the level that it should be. Unfortunately, if you do fall foul of that and you go and eat something like a chocolate bar, then you're just going to repeat this process again. So from the craving, you're going to go back up to this super high elevated levels of blood sugar and insulin, and this is going to be a fat storage period. So as you can see, I know it does get a little bit complicated at times, but basically if you're eating something sugary, you go up, you store fat, you go down, your energy's low, you crave, you go up, you store fat, you go down, you crave, your blood sugar's too low, etc. And this process for most people will be played out throughout the full day. So you'll be basically storing fat and craving and being tired for most of the day. On the other hand, if you remove that kind of food from your diet, or make it in the minority, and you just stick to things like veg, nuts, seeds, meats and things like that, which have a lesser effect on your blood sugar levels, then you're going to have something more rhythmic and more stable like this, which is good because this period here is kind of giving your body enough sugar or glucose for your body to use up, and to basically use for whatever you're doing that day. And because it's all happened nice and steadily and nice and calm, you don't then have that crash that you do on this one. And then again, next time you're hungry, you're just going to eat something that's low in GI. It's not going to spike the blood sugar levels, and again, you're not going to have that crash, and you're just going to continue like this. Oops. So ultimately, what you want to create is this kind of rhythm with your insulin and your blood sugar levels. And the easiest way to do that is by simply removing those foods. So I hope that wasn't too technical, but this is basically the roller coaster-like problem that most people have on a day-to-day basis, which causes excessive fat storage on the love handle and the back fat area. So the solution, like I say, is simply doing the opposite of what we talked about in the problem. Now, if you want to reduce love handle fat, then you've got to reduce and control insulin. I'm not saying remove everything 100%, but things like processed foods, refined carbs, white carbohydrates, etc., they have to be in the very small minority of the foods that you eat. And like I say, ultimately, if you do that, you will prevent these insulin spikes and these energy lull and craving periods. So, and obviously avoid storing fat in your love handles. Not sure why 4 keep coming up before 3, but that's cool. And like I say, if we focus on reducing insulin, we'll also go a long way to reduce cortisol and subsequently abdominal fat as well, simply because we'll not be under that stress of constantly having low blood sugar then high blood sugar, which is obviously quite dangerous to your body without getting into it too much. And the best advice if you want to eat carbs, so if you want to eat starchy carbs and white carbohydrates, things like rice and things like that, then just to have them on the days that you were training. And the reason for that is because after a workout, you obviously use a lot more blood sugar that's stored within the body, and you become less insulin sensitive to carbs on the days that you're training. The best time generally is obviously within the sort of first hour or so after you've actually trained. But for me, you know, I'm a kind of practical kind of guy, so having carbs on workout days is better than having them on non-working days. And that's basically it, chaps, for insulin. Ultimately, stabilize insulin, you will lose the love handles and the back fat, and make sure white carbs, refined carbs, things like that are the minority of your diet. And if they are in there, just have them after your workout or on training days. Now, there's a lot of information there, so if there's anything that you're unsure of or anything you would like to ask any questions about, just pop a comment below and I'll respond.